Hi, I'm Shulin, and welcome to After the Bar. This podcast brings you stories from some of the most accomplished lawyers, former lawyers, and other movers and shakers in the legal industry from around the world. I'm a former lawyer myself, and over the years, I've spoken to thousands of lawyers as a legal recruiter. After the Bar aims to bring some of these conversations to you and giving all of us a glimpse into their world. If you'd like to receive updates on new episodes, just search for Shulin Lee on LinkedIn and follow me. So today we have Buchan Love here to share with us about his journey as a senior lawyer who spent many years working in Asia. Currently based back in New Zealand, his hometown Christchurch, Buchan was most recently spearheading the legal team of Mead Johnson Nutrition and then with RB, heading up a team of more than 30 lawyers. Buchan and I have known each other for well over 10 years now, and when I first met him as a client, I remember him flying in from Bangkok to Singapore. He struck me as someone who was very assimilated as an expat working in Asia, someone who cares very deeply about his team, and a lawyer who has a lot of heart. So Buchan has a career that spans across more than 25 years. He's been a regional counsel, executive leader, and company director. He's had more than 11 years of experience in private practice and then followed by 15 years of in-house legal experience covering countries in Southeast Asia, China, India, ANZ, Latin America, and even countries across the Middle East and Africa. He's worked very closely with C-suite and management, and he prides himself with providing the business with operationally realistic solutions and prudent governance, enabling sustainable reputation and growth. So, thank you so much, Buchan, for being here today. five hours time difference. Yes, of course. Yeah, very excited to be speaking with you. I mean, we've had so many coffees, right?
Yeah, indeed. And
Yes.
no, it's good. It's good to be able to share some experiences. Yeah.
So you spent quite a number of years in practice in Auckland, in Bangkok for a short stint, and then in London. Then you moved back to Bangkok, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then you were in a law firm for 7 years in Bangkok, I think? Was it?
Yeah, so in London, after that contract job, I worked with a firm, Rowan Moore, which merged in with Mayer Brown.
Yes.
And I was on their construction team. So I did a mix of projects and litigation. And so that was a good experience. As a lawyer with, 4 years plus under his belt at that time, being on both transaction and project side and learning more about the financing and things like that, but also being on the litigation side. So I dealt with a lot of like leaky basement cases for water companies and things like that. And so, that really helped me realize, no, litigation is not my thing. I thought that I when I was at law school, I thought that's what I wanted to do, but this confirmed, no, that's not me. The transaction side's much more interesting for me. And again, that's me. That's my personal.
But until you've tried it, you wouldn't have known, right? Actually, until you actually tried litigation.
Correct. And I think most of the law firms do a good job of, if you come in as a trainee, as an intern, most firms rotate you through the different departments, and so you do get a taste. And I think this is the key thing that pushed me towards in-house. I was feeling at a crossroads, and I started looking around at what can I do from here. I can't make partner here. Am I going to move country? What am I going to do?
Buchan, how old were you when you faced this crossroads? How many years PQE did you have? Do you remember?
By then, so I had 4 years in New Zealand plus 7 years, 10 or
10 years, yes, that's pretty senior.
Right?
Pretty senior.
Years out when I start thinking about it. So basically, I'm not happy because I feel trapped. Even though the work was great, the firm was good, but I felt trapped.
You couldn't progress, I guess.
Can't progress. And so I actively started looking around at options. So, for example, I was on holiday back to New Zealand. So I caught up with some of the old partners from my old firm in New Zealand, many of whom had moved on to other things. And I had chats with them. What might my options be if I did decide to come back here? The work that I was doing in Bangkok is the kind of work that almost never comes up in New Zealand, and that all the senior partners would kill to get. They couldn't believe the work that I was doing.
Wow.
Just because the market's it's a smaller country, right?
Very different.
But like I talked to one partner who had moved into competition law quite heavily, and he said, well, one option you could, with the work that you've done in overseas, you could come in and work with the Commerce Commission here in New Zealand and become a prosecutor. And then, if you like it and cut your teeth, you can always move over to the other side and act on defense. And I seriously, thought about that because that did play to some of the work that I had done.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like on the personal side, it seemed way too much of a big shift.
Because were you married already by then? You married already?
Yeah, definitely. And I've got my kids are very small at that time.
Yes, in Bangkok.
And the other, so there's the push factor was the fact that I was feeling trapped.
Yes.
And so the intellectual response of that is, the feeling is I'm trapped, I've got to get out. The intellectual response is, well, I need to find a pathway.
Yes.
So actively look for that. And I mean, for the purposes of this conversation in particular, I would emphasize the importance of seeking out and asking people, even people who you maybe don't get on with.
Very important, right?
Who have had very different experiences from yourself. Even though you're sure you don't want to follow in their footsteps.
Right.
But get that perspective, as well as people who you admire and like and would love to follow. Make it an intellectual exercise of assessing the
That's very interesting, because most of us will just fall back on our friends, family, our immediate network, and people we like, not seek out people you don't quite get on with.
I mean, just because I had already learned from the experience of thinking I want to do litigation, finding you don't like it, thinking I'm going to be this hotshot specialist private practice lawyer to becoming an absolute generalist. And you realize that things can work out differently, and what you think might be the right answer is maybe not you. So challenge yourself and experience different things. And you can't experience everything, so you have to ask.
Yes, that's so brilliant. So when you were feeling trapped, you knew that, okay, you got to seek out a different pathway. So what you did was you looked at options in Bangkok, and you even flew back to New Zealand to meet with some of your ex-colleagues, ex-bosses.
Yeah, and the other key aspect is that through my work in private practice, I had worked very closely with lots of Asia regional
your clients,
multinationals as clients. And in fact, I was close enough to some of them that they didn't have very much footprint in and they couldn't afford on their budgets to have footprint in Asia. So they would actually second me in for several months at a time to do a couple of large projects, but I'd actually be inside. So if you ever get that chance as a private practice lawyer, the chance to sit inside the client, take it. Even if you are sure you're not going to like it or whatever, just do it, because it gives you so much learning. And through that work, I had really got a taste for what happens inside the client before they come in the door of the external law firm.
Right. Before they come to you.
Well, but especially with transactional work, which is the bulk of my work, which is why are you buying this company? Or why are you merging with them? And how did you identify them? What were the drivers that got you to the point where you're walking into the external lawyer's office and saying, we want you to implement this transaction? And, initially, I think that's the big transition. When you're a junior lawyer, especially coming out of law school, and assuming that you love it. If you don't love it, then just get out of it, because it's a meat grinder industry.
Yes. Yes. Going back to when you were making that transition from, so you did your secondment, you were saying, how many months was it?
I did several 1 to 3 month immersions or secondments.
Okay.
I was still working for other clients at the same time, but I was dedicated to these roles. So through that, obviously the in-house path, and that whole intellectual curiosity about what's going on before the client walks in the door.
Yes.
I became much more interested in that. And as it happened, one of my really good in-house regional counsel clients just happened to drop in a phone call in front of her business colleagues that she was going to be hiring. And they'd worked with me for a long time. And so I sort of took the hint and I applied for that. I said, would it be okay if I applied for that? And she said, yeah. I was hoping you'd get the message. And
so you overheard the conversation in the meeting room. She deliberately wanted you to overhear the conversation. Yeah, perhaps.
And so I applied for that, and I didn't get it actually. I got down to the final two, and as it turns out, I was very. A few months later, there was that company got acquired, and I was really pleased.
Bullet dodged.
But I was massively disappointed at the time. But I also realized, hang on, my first shot at this, I was, this close. And so I started looking around, and I had thought, I'm in Bangkok at that stage, I had thought that would mean a move to Singapore. But then the job with Bristol Myers Squibb, Mead Johnson came up. It was based in the Mead Johnson regional office, which was then in Bangkok. So I took that. So long way of getting around to your original question, which is that a difficult transition? So yes and no. No, in the sense that I was consciously looking at what my options and pathways were.
Yeah.
I already had the experience of a hint of experience of working more closely with clients and realizing the importance of a matrix organization and having the client in the room with you throughout your deliberation process, rather than going away and then coming back and being able to hide behind your big corporate law office and then prepare to meet the client, right?
Yes. Yes.
Whereas when you're in-house, the client's there with you and you have to
24/7
answer on the fly. So I already had an experience of that. So and for those reasons, it wasn't a difficult transition. On the other hand, I was very concerned that going into the corporate world would be a culture shock and one which I wouldn't like. I was afraid that companies would be very political and very difficult to navigate the internal workings. And
that's one of the biggest fears of private practice lawyers making that transition, because it's no longer that you're acting for multiple clients, right? You're acting for that one client, so that cultural fit when looking for that first in-house role.
And I think the key difference, maybe it's different now, but when I was in private practice, law firms were pretty simple. There's a managing partner, there's and on any particular matter that you're working on, there's a lead partner, and as long as you keep her or him happy, and the client obviously, but you're working. You're either you're working with a lead partner, or you are the lead partner. You need your colleagues to leverage their expertise. but it's a pretty flat structure.
Mm-hmm.
It's whereas companies can have way more layers, and more importantly, in the modern, especially in multinationals, it's very matrix.
Very matrix.
There's no clear hierarchy. Often the job titles are completely misleading, which is funny because lawyers, you can kind of tell what they are based on their title. Whereas
everyone's on the website, so you can just see at one glance.
And so my biggest fear was, I think, and like you say, it's quite common amongst private practice lawyers going in, is that companies are going to be these horrible, infighting, political creatures. But Mead Johnson just had this fantastic, very welcoming culture, and it was a growing company.
Yes.
And then BMS split it off, and so that unleashed its potential, and it was a fantastic deal, and good for BMS, great for Mead Johnson.
And you were in BMS for 2 years plus when it was BMS, right? Then after that, there was the split.
So I covered both the pharmaceutical business as well as the Mead Johnson nutrition.
And for the benefit of those listening, Mead Johnson is an infant formula company.
Infant formula, pediatric nutrition. That's correct.
Yes. And I always remember when you and I first met in Singapore, and you showed me Shulin, the consumers are putting their babies' lives in our hands. You did this, and that stuck with me forever. I was like, gosh, the mission was so strong. You were so passionate about the company's business. So I remember that. But so in your first, say 6 to 12 months, when you were first in this role, because yes, you've done a lot of secondments, but being in-house properly, that still required like an adjustment in your mindset.
Huge adjustment. Yeah. I love the fact that there was a massive variety of work. So that really played to my experience and what I enjoyed about being a lawyer, a generalist lawyer. But also it was the sense that I was dealing with all levels. I was literally dealing with people on the factory floor right up to C-suite. And Mead Johnson was perhaps a sweet spot in terms of it's a big multinational with a huge global footprint. But on the other hand, within my first week, I was sitting down with the CEO and other C-suite executives. The hour before, I had been in a factory dealing with, some of the engineers on a pretty minor issue, but not to them. It was an important issue for them.
Yes.
So, it was great for that. And I think that was, that's where, so that was great.
Yes.
But the culture shock comes from having to learn to navigate the very different and quite amorphous way that big companies work. And you spend quite a lot of time just working out, who do I need to speak to? Who do I need to find out that information? Where do I get it? Unlike law firms, the companies don't have fantastic database systems of all the information. There's not a lot of institutional knowledge tends to be in people's heads.
Yes.
And so you have to then hunt out the right person. I mean, I think that's probably changing now as with AI and technology, but I think it still holds.
It still holds.
Companies are terrible at retaining institutional knowledge, and so people become so important. So I think that's the biggest. You go from seeking technical information to seeking knowledge.
Understand.
And it's knowledge that's completely not legal stuff. What may be a no-brainer for you is a big deal for the client.
Yes.
And you really get a feel for that when you're in-house, because the people are literally in your office, or you're in their office, hopefully, and they're worried about something, and you're able to provide the solution.
And they're looking to you as the internal lawyer that you will have the answers, right?
Yeah, and that's a bit nerve-wracking. That's a bit tough. It seems when you're a lawyer, you must know everything about everything, right?
Yes,
It's just like, no. And so managing expectations, and really I thought I was good at it, but then I realized going in-house that you really have to learn how to translate not so much the language. I was always relatively careful to try and use simple language, but or at least avoid technical jargon. But lawyers have a worldview that's based on our training and our
absolutely,
the way the law works.
absolutely.
And you become aware of the fact that you view the world in a particular way, and normal people don't.
They don't. So
the rest of humans, you have to learn how to translate that. Yeah.
So that's a wealth of information, Buchan. So for someone who's considering making that move from practice to in-house and then already in-house, this is what I'm curious about, because increasingly we hear of junior lawyers thinking, okay, I'm going to go in-house, right? And then when they go in-house, they realize they didn't give enough thought process into it. Unlike you, a lot of them haven't had the chance to do secondments. And on the other end of the spectrum, I once helped to recruit a partner into a corporation. Actually, it was a financial institution. And so she was like very senior, more than 10 years working in a law firm. Then she transited to a big bank. And she told me that for the first 6 months, every day she thought, okay, I better go back to a law firm. She couldn't deal with the culture shock, but she stuck it out. And then after 8 months, she realized, okay, I need to stop sending long emails to my business folks. All I need to do was to just pick up the phone, make an appointment or just talk about it over the phone, or I just go to their desk and then it can be settled in a few minutes, not like back and forth, legal memos. So just to summarize what you shared, right? Because you said that, okay, you got to be able to break things down in more commercial language maybe, and understand that the business folks, they have different concerns and that they have a different mindset. But what were some other things that because you said there was a mindset shift, what are the things that you had to consciously change?
I think the other big shift, which goes to answer this question, is that you are part of the client, even though you're independent.
That's true. Oh, that's true.
And it's important to keep some of those formalities in place to make sure that you can remain independent.
Yeah.
For example, I really don't. I've turned down job offers on the basis that I would be reporting into a CFO, for example. Right. I'm not going to do that. And so you've got to maintain. So you're independent, but you're heavily invested in the business, and especially once you get a little bit more senior, and you don't have to be a general counsel, you can just be a senior lawyer within a department. But most of the business, including some very senior business executives, are going to view you as a leader. And you're expected to have a view and an opinion. And so I think the big realization for me, because I can relate to what you were just sharing about your other colleague, initially you want to do a whole lot of research and write a whole stuff. It's just like, forget it, right?
Yes.
You get that confidence to just say, here's what I think we should do. I've got my reasons. And at first I would consciously ask, I would say, I've got my reasons for my answer. Do you want me to share them with you? Or are you just happy for me to say I'm okay with it? And I mean, that's a bit clumsy, but sometimes I would deal with that with more senior people, because sometimes they know very well where you're coming from, and many of them have been lawyers in the past, or at least got legal training. So, they get it. But other times they want to know. They want to know every detail. And it depends on the personality, and maybe she is conscious that she's going to have to explain it to someone else. So, you need to explain it to her, or she's fine with it. She's like, yeah, no, we've covered this on another one before. Is it the same thing? Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's do it.
Okay.
So it's partly confidence, which comes from just
years of experience,
putting the effort in, and
yes.
But it's the confidence that comes in that first 6 months, right? Of throwing yourself in there and really, and again, connecting with as many people in the organization, there's different levels that helps with that confidence. But it's that confidence that you are a trusted leader and you're also viewed as an expert, rightly or wrongly. And so you can leverage that. And sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, this is really complicated. If I give you an answer now, it's going to be half-baked. So I'm going to need time on this one, but don't play that one too often. It's more important to, you can do that easier when you've made lots of on-the-fly judgment calls that have panned out well and shown good judgment. Then because then when you say, this one's tricky, I'm going to need some time on it, or I'm going to need some external help on it, they will respect you for that, because like, well, he always helps us out normally, and it must be really hard if he can't do it, right?
Yes.
So or if he can't do it on the fly. So again, there's a lot of relationship management, and listening is so important. Like within one meeting, with a bunch of executives, especially if they're from different functions, you'll have as many different personalities and intellectual types as there are people in the room. It takes sometimes more, because some of them seem to have split personalities. So listening to what questions people ask of each other and listening to what they're asking you. Are they someone who communicates directly, and the question that they're asking is clearly well-informed, and maybe they've got some legal experience, and so they're asking you as a lawyer's question?
Yes.
Or are they asking you a completely commercial business question, and it's important that you share your view because you're part of the business, but on the other hand, make it clear that, well, but then one of my things I would say, but then I'm a conservative lawyer. If I was a gung-ho entrepreneur businessman, I might take a different view.
So, Bakan, you bring up a very interesting point, because in all my years of working with lawyers, especially in-house lawyers who are senior, and maybe the teams are very lean. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 lawyers in the Singapore office. And when
most of my experience,
Yes. And when the business comes to them and they're like, for instance, they ask you, hey, Bakan, can we launch this product? We haven't gone through these tests. We haven't gotten all the approvals, but, we really need to do it, So there's a pressure because, they are revenue generators. And then you said it right, because don't forget that as an in-house lawyer, you're not just a lawyer. You're not just a gatekeeper, policeman. And I remember you telling me, like, when you were looking to recruit, you were like, Shu Ling, I don't want someone coming in just to be a policeman or woman, right? I'm here. The lawyer needs to be here to be a business enabler as well. But it's tricky because, you want to play safe. You don't want to have sleepless nights thinking that you might get into trouble for giving the wrong advice. But at the same time, you're like, you want to win the favor and approval of the business folks, because the business folks don't want a lawyer who's always a showstopper, right? So that balance, is it difficult to strike?
There's the rub, right?
Yeah.
That's the essence. That's the key challenge of the in-house role, especially when you're senior, because you either have to deal with those kinds of issues directly, often under enormous pressure, and you've got some very significant people sitting in the room literally glowering at you. Other times, though, as a senior, it's because they've gone to your team. Your team has given the correct answer, which is essentially you can't do that. But they've come to you because it's like your person is saying, no, I don't want no lawyers, right? And it's like, so then how do you strike the balance between appeasing the hothead executive while backing up your
Team, yes.
And also making sure, as the most important point, that the company's sustainability and reputation and liability is all protected. So
there's no easy answer.
No easy answer to that. I would say my few pointers would be, if you've spent time with all of the people concerned, you will understand them better, and you will also have the opportunity to try and minimize the times when you get those impossible situations where, we're going to launch tomorrow, but we forgot to get all these approvals. Can we just go ahead anyway? Right? Those situations are awful, right? But if you work closely, and that means getting out of your office and being in their office, or being by their side down on the factory floor, if they're the senior engineer or whatever it is that they do, you can minimize that. So that's being proactive about it. The second part of that, it's a corollary, is that if you've built up trust on a lot of small things, when those big, as you know, split hits the fan, situations come up, you'll have some credits in your trust bank that you can draw on. And in fact, in certain, sometimes heated discussions I've had, where I've been able to pull out from the last 5 years examples of where I've absolutely given the solution. And I've said, so-and-so, who I'm having the fight with, and it's a fight in a room of people, it's getting heated. I've said, remember this, and this. I got you through all of those. And on this one, I'm saying this, and for that.
Wow. That's very powerful.
That's the thing. If you can't work out that I'm drawing on my trust bank, I will spell it out for you.
Yes.
Now, it worked with that individual. But you have to have those deposits into the trust account first, right?
Yes.
And a lot of the times those can be very small wins. Again, I go back to the point around you're seen as an expert, even though something's actually very simple, but they think you're a genius, right?
Yeah.
So know the people, spend time with them, be out there. If you're in a regional position, don't sit in Singapore or wherever you are in the regional office. Go out to the markets and have time with them, especially in Asia, right? Turning up, you've won half your battle just by turning up.
Yes.
Although nowadays with travel restrictions,
it's a bit more challenging.
Sensitivity, that's not as easy to do, but you get my point.
Things are hopefully going back to normal. But so
I would say, build up your trust bank with small wins, draw on those, but be judicious about when you draw on those. And I think it's my view. It fitted the personality types, the majority of personality types I was dealing with. I struck a few in the last few years where it didn't work. I think most business people respect a subject matter expert who, with deposits in the trust account, is saying, I cannot tolerate this. This is something that can't go ahead. Now, and then the final point that I would say is, but you have to have what to do. Now that I've said I can't tolerate what you're suggesting, you have to have, here's my suggestion.
Yes. Here's the other solution.
It may not be the answer right there and then.
Right.
But it may, I think a favorite phrase, and I know lots of in-house lawyers, and it's not unique to me, lots of in-house lawyers do this, but it's like, if you help me understand your business objective better, I can help map a pathway for you. But it's your pathway. At the end of the day, they're the business. My job is to help the sustainable part of sustainable growth, as well as the growth part. And so, and again, if you've got deposits in your trust account, you can say that, and in my experience, 9.5 times out of 10, things calm down and they go, yeah, actually, okay, you've helped us through lots of things. If you're saying no, then it must be pretty bad. You usually come up with a solution off the cuff. You can't do that this time. This is more complicated.
Yeah.
Later on in my career in the last few years, I had experiences where the culture was different and the personalities were different. And the only way I could have those conversations was just to go above head.
Okay.
It's something I always prided myself on never doing.
Yeah.
I never did that. For, 13, 14 years, I never did that. But then if this is the only way that I can stop a disaster happening, then I'll do it.
Yeah.
And to my relief, once I got up to the right level, and again, this is about navigating the matrix, right?
Yes.
Once I got to the right level, and in some cases that level was right up at CEO level.
Yes.
Once I got to the right level, we had a proper discussion.
Right.
Well, of course, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it the right way. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. But you won't get to have that right level conversation if you haven't navigated the matrix, if you haven't got deposits in your trust account.
I got it. Very, very useful. So to just summarize, I think there is no easy answer, and developing trusted relationships, understanding the business. And because a lot of the business people, not all, but a lot of them tend to be, it comes with the territory, right? They want to charge ahead. And so that sometimes it's just like, hang on, remember how we got through. I really like that line, remember how we got through. I got you through these. So trust me, right? I know what I'm doing. So I think that's very helpful. Okay. So.
And I would add one thing, because I think it's an important one, is maybe for people who are new, like a lot of big multinationals have their statement of ethics, or they have
the mission statement.
Mission statements and the cultural statement that they have. And they often have values like entrepreneurship and stuff. And sometimes you'll get the person who's pushing you as an in-house attorney, the commercial person will say, I'm being an entrepreneur here.
Yes.
And you go, I've had this conversation a couple of times.
Right.
Let's look up the definition of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who owns a business. Now, if you owned this business, and by the way, you do, because you're all on the equity plan, right?
Yes.
If you owned this business, imagine it was your mom and pop business. This is your family's income. Are you going to charge ahead, given that you've got legal, compliance, and quality all telling you this is a bad idea? No way would you do that as an entrepreneur. No. You were going to say, holy shit, I'm going to be smacking into a wall here. I better sort my stuff out.
Yeah.
I fix this.
Yes.
And so helping, and lawyers are good at language, or should be, being able to take the language and utilize it and get into meaning. That's the bread and butter of what legal training is all about. So yes. To remind people of what it really means to be entrepreneurs.
Yes. Well, that's so powerful. And I'm sure it's like a light bulb moment for me. You're right. Because it's so obvious, right? You have the company ethos on the website. You have the mission statement. Sometimes it's just to rein it back and like, hang on, you own a stake in this company. We all do. Yeah. We all have equity, right? Yeah. So, I guess obviously COVID has changed things a little bit. But here, there's so many lawyers from many different countries. So when you first came here, yes, you said you felt like an expat again, but it was quite welcoming, right? You didn't feel like you stuck out or anything. It was a very easy transition.
Singapore is a very expat-orientated city, rightly or wrongly. It just is. I know that can sometimes cause some tensions, but they're the kind of tensions that would grow up anywhere where you've got people meeting from other countries. So yes. And I think, again, one of the experiences that I really got from being involved with a law firm in Thailand, Thailand has its own unique legal system. It's civil law based system, but it draws pretty heavily on the common law in many ways. They were never colonized, so it's grown up as a unique system. It's drawn very consciously from both the civil and the common law. And I remember being at university, there was a paper on comparative law between civil and
Yes. Yes.
Bother doing that. That's a waste of time.
Yes.
And then once you get into an international role, you realize, well, chances are most of the countries that you're dealing with for your particular job are from the other branch of law from what
not the common law.
I'm from a common law background, but most of the jurisdictions were either socialist or civil.
Yeah, especially in Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia, right?
Yeah, you're right.
So, and it's what's really interesting about the variety of lawyers that you meet in as in-house counsel in Singapore, because they're from all over the world. You know, there's people from Mexico and Argentina. There's people from England and Aussie and New Zealand and all over the show, right? And you really start to realize that there's a whole different way of thinking about it. And as long as people leave there, well, at home we did it this way, and as long as they park there and but it's good to know, well, at home they do it this way, and there's some really good things about that. Is there a way that we can draw that in here? And then it's a creative process. But that's really interesting, I think. And something, again, if you spend time with other people around town, then you can start having your perspective challenged and altered, and you can draw on different things. It's
Okay, great. And Bucken, back in 2017, so this was like 4 years ago, and just now you mentioned about it because there was a very big RB and Mead Johnson merger, right? And I remember at one point you were managing a team of 33 lawyers and paralegals across Asia, which is the biggest team you ever had to manage.
Well, it was across the globe because
across the globe. Sorry,
I got all the troubled children market. So I got all of Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East.
Wow.
And South Asia, right?
Yes.
You know, if you're looking at it on a corruption index, I got all the problem children.
Goodness. Okay. And people management is actually one of the hardest things for anyone. I think even more so for lawyers, if I can say that.
Yes. No, I fully agree with that.
So how do you manage it? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, what makes you a good lawyer is probably not going to help you be a great people person, right?
True. Very well said. I did not. That's true.
I had the experience of managing a very small team, not all of whom were with me within Asia, but you're only 3-4 hours flying time from each other if you really needed to. And you're in the same time zone and things, but managing globally was a challenge, especially Singapore is probably one of the worst time zones
it is
for a global role. And, I can't do a $10,000 30-hour flight to Mexico every month, right?
Yes.
I can only do that once, maybe twice a year. Putting aside carbon footprint, just looking at it in old-fashioned economic terms. So my approach to managing teams has always been lawyers are professionals. Unlike most other functions within a company, we are quite heavily individual-based. You do need colleagues that you can turn to and bounce ideas off, but let's be honest, most of our work it's just one person doing it and then every now and then seeking help from someone else, but there's one of us doing the actual work. And so I've always taken the approach, lawyers are professionals. They will have different motivations for what made them be a lawyer and what they enjoy about being a lawyer. Some lawyers like to just grind through loads of really interesting work. But they're not particularly interested in navigating their way up the promotion chain. Or they think they are, but when they realize that it's less and less legal work and more people management skills, they get turned off. And that's okay. If they just like cranking through loads of work, then give them lots of interesting work and keep them stimulated in that way. Unfortunately, the difficult thing with that particular career objective is that companies tend not to recognize that. They're always, no, you have to grow people. They have to be promoted. And like, they're a subject matter expert.
Mm.
And they crank through loads of work. And I had to fight sometimes for certain members of my team who were very good. They had no ambition to go into my job or anyone else's job. They just want to do great work for their clients. And the clients love them. So I literally had to draw on GMs of certain markets to back me up to say, look, this person's going to be slowly shoved out and they're like, no way, we want that person to stay. And I'm like, yeah, well, help me out here. Because you don't fit squarely into the sort of more sales and marketing and commercial orientated HR programs that most HR organizations slavishly follow. And so there's that aspect. On the other hand, some people really do love the people aspect. They love the people management. They love the sort of the sense of kudos that comes from advancing up a ladder. They may or may not be good lawyers. So I think as a leader, you've got to make sure that they're both, right? You can't just have a people person who can't do the work.
Yep.
You need both. In the one individual. I had experiences of people who were what I would consider to be real climbers. But when you actually drill down into their coal-face legal knowledge of being an in-house counsel, actually providing solutions, and that they just couldn't cut it. And I exited those people one way or another. And so, the great thing about being an in-house lawyer is that you have to be good at both things, technical and people management.
Yes.
Especially if you're wanting to do that real advancement. And if you're wanting to get into senior GC or regional counsel, GC type roles, you've got to have that aspect. You spend all your time managing people and issues. And the two things are intertwined. You can't separate them. Rather than actually solving legal issues.
What's always been your philosophy in managing a team of lawyers? Because, in working with you for a while, I remember first meeting you was over 10 years ago. In recruiting your team of lawyers, in developing their careers, you put in a lot of time and effort. It wasn't just like, Shulin, here's a job description, there you go. You really took the time to make me understand what it was that you were looking for. And it was very thorough. And actually being so involved in developing your team, your individual team members' careers, it takes out a lot of time and effort. So why do you do that? What's your philosophy around all this?
Okay. One was because I realized the first chance when I was able to start building a team and hiring people was very exciting. I'm not going to have to do everything myself anymore.
Yes.
I realized, I don't know what I'm doing. And so I went to people who I saw were magnificent at it. And typically that's going to be a GM type person. And there was one in particular in Thailand. I don't mind naming him because I know that a lot of other people found him very inspirational. Matthew Chappell was the GM of Thailand at the time. Just a magnificent, inspiring leader, but very grounded and people just loved him. And he told me, I asked him for guidance. Look, I'm new to this whole hiring thing. And he goes, you are selling. He goes, he ran through me with the job description. He goes, wow, this sounds like an amazing job. If you're a lawyer. He goes, I'm not a lawyer, but I imagine that this would be really exciting. I said, yeah, it's a fantastic. He goes, yeah, but he goes, they're not lucky to get it. You're lucky to get them. Your role as the hiring manager is to sell the role to the candidates. You are selling the company and the role and this organization and the client and the colleagues to this person. And if you sell it to them, then you'll get someone who is really good at what you're wanting to do. And I very consciously took that on board. He was also someone who emphasized the importance of listening, active listening. And so that's where that came from. I probably went overboard a little bit, but then when I started getting such great results through you, thank you, but also
thank you.
Before meeting you,
yes,
going back to my point about listening, it's just like so many recruiters just didn't want to hear what my company was about. They didn't want to hear what the organization was about. They're just like, what's the JD? Send me a JD and I'll find you someone. And
because everyone does that. Everyone's just like, here's the JD, go for it.
and I realize everyone's got their targets and all the rest, but I mean, you know that when I met you, I was about ready to cancel the contract with the organization you were with at that time, but it's like when you sat and you listened and you asked some really insightful questions about the culture of the company, the culture of working with me, and the types of people that I was providing service to, that enabled me to be able to communicate across what I'm looking for in more detail. And again, Mead Johnson as the company then had a very strong and now I realize quite unique culture. And so it was important to get someone who was going to fit in with that. And I had been matrixed interview. I was interviewed 4 times by lawyers from BMS, Mead Johnson.
Yep.
And I was interviewed 5 or 6 matrix interviewers for a junior lawyer in-house legal position in Southeast Asia.
So there's like 10, 11 people who interviewed you. It's crazy.
And it's crazy, but on the other hand, it means your failure rate is really low. Now, probably there's a balance somewhere there that's better, but I took that on board, and it's just like, well, and I'd also had feedback from once I got my first role. My then boss gave me feedback about what all the Matrix people had said as to why I got the role, and so it's like, wow, this wasn't just going through some procedural motions. These people were really interviewing me.
Yeah.
And they had obviously been really well briefed by the hiring manager. So it's like, so when I added all that experience up together, that's why I took the approach that I did. And it worked out very, very well. And the one time that I allowed the commercial folks to override me and not go with my process, it didn't work out.
I see.
So there you go.
Very interesting. So, Bakan, let's talk about present day now, because, you've shared so much about your career. Everyone, I think I'm enthralled. In fact, I'm learning things that I know a lot about you, Bakan, but there are still things that I'm hearing for the first time. So that's really good. And I mean, I really thank you for the opportunity that you gave me when you first engaged working with me. And I think I asked all those questions because you were willing to answer them. Not everyone is that willing to invest that kind of time. So, kudos to you. And
well, having passion for your organization and what it does helps.
Yes.
But if you really believe and love in the organization that you're working for, it helps.
Yeah. Oh, that comes through because you can't manufacture that.
Yeah.
So right now, Bakan, you're back in New Zealand. That's why we're not doing this in person. And I mean, I think you're the envy of many people out there because you've on your LinkedIn, it says that you have an active life and passive income. I'm not here to ask you about your investment strategy or your tips, but it appears that you've managed to.
I think the various finance regulations have something to say about what I can say.
Not going to ask that. So it appears that you've managed to cash out early, which is great. And I think everyone in the corporate world, whether you're a lawyer or not, every professional, always thinking like, oh, I've got a plan for my retirement, one day, get out of the corporate world, But you have always been very passionate about your work. So then now you're back in New Zealand. Is it the case that you achieve your goals early, much, much earlier than you expected? Or is it like, this is something you've always planned for?
I have been planning for this for some time. I had intended for it to be a little bit later, my mid-50s rather than 50. But I think the circumstances that I was in, and in particular, the whole 2020 with the pandemic, it really accelerated the internal discussion I was having inside myself, but also with my family around what is it that that we value, what is it that's important, and what are the goals that you want to, what are the goals that you want to go for?
Yes,
and I'm not unique in that. I think it's been a worldwide phenomenon that
it is.
People have really started reassessing what life means and all the rest. And I think to that point, it goes back. I enjoyed meeting and being with the clients that I was helping out, and doing it through Zoom calls, and just it can become quite tiresome, right?
Yes.
But again, it's also because I'd already sort of, mentally sort of started moving on to there's other things that I want to do, and there's other things that I value.
Yeah.
I have loved being a lawyer. From the first week in law school, all through my career, I've loved it, and I think you have to. If you don't, please, if you are listening to this and you are sort of not really enjoying it, just change, because it, as I said earlier, it is a meat grinder industry, whether private practice or in-house, and in-house has huge amounts of stresses that private practice doesn't have. You are the client, and you're with your client 24/7, and you don't leave the job at the office. It comes home with you, rightly or wrongly.
Yes.
It does.
Yes.
And so, but I've loved it. But I just reassessed what is important. My health is more important. And I'll share a story. I've shared it with you before, but I think it's a good one.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to have this experience very early in my career. The daughter of one of the senior partners of at the firm I worked for in New Zealand, that I'd become friendly with, she came over to Bangkok when she was on holiday to stay with my wife and I. And she was early 20s, sort of doing her gap year and traveling around, and I'd been out for several years by then, and I said to her, I just want to share that your father was a real gentleman lawyer. He epitomized the idea of a gentleman lawyer. He was dedicated to his clients. He was technically proficient. He serviced clients well. He had what in New Zealand would call mana, or kudos, and a sense of presence. And he also, really took his role as a senior lawyer with junior lawyers and training them seriously, and blah blah. All these great things to say, all of which are true. And she looked at me with this sort of blank expression, and she just said, "It's really nice to hear you say that, but all I can remember is that he was never there." And what a statement. I mean, that was like a bullet in the head, right? And at home that evening, I said to my wife, we didn't have children at that point. I said, if we're lucky enough to have children, when we have children,
yes,
I don't want my kids saying that to someone.
It's heartbreaking to hear that. Heartbreaking, sobering,
massively powerful. And she had a good relationship with it, but she just said, I just remember he was never there. I'm like, and so it sounds corny, right? It sounds like one of these corny stories someone puts on.
No, it's not. It's not.
But that's a mess. In your life, you have certain, often quite short, very impactful moments that you don't realize how influential they are. Sometimes you do, but sometimes, and it's only later, and especially once you become a parent yourself, you really, really start to that. I think that's the biggest event in your life that helps you readjust your priorities as becoming a parent. And so I've drawn on that.
Yes.
And it's important to have that perspective. I saw something recently. It's like, your home, your time at home, that's real life. Being at work is not real life. You've got to remember that. And so I think having that sense of, having a strong sense of what it is that you value, bringing that to work, but on the other hand, realizing that you are replaceable at work. You're not replaceable
at home. Yeah, it's true.
Whatever your home relationships are, not necessarily parent. It might just be, close friends or something, but partners, whatever. And I think the biggest thing for me was that I realized that I was defining myself as a lawyer, and because I am passionate about it, that was okay. But then you start realizing that's not okay, to actually define who you are by your career. There's so much more to life than that.
There's so much more. Yes. And because of that very impactful moment when you heard about how her dad was never there, you shared with me before that you make it a point to have a sit-down dinner with your kids almost every day, right? But if you're in Singapore back then, if you're with them.
Yeah. And so be home. And one of the good things about the traffic in Bangkok, because I lived on the sort of outskirts in the outer suburbs, so I had a minimum 1 hour journey each way. Often, if it rained, it could be a 2.5, 3 hour journey. But and I was also fortunate for much of that time while I was working at the company, I was able to hire a driver. So you're in the back and, you can do work. But that traffic gives you a time to transition from being big corporate lawyer, leader, executive type to where you snap your fingers and things happen and all the rest, down to, I'm dad. So, come home, take your suit off and put some sloppy joes on and then be present.
Be present.
If you're home. In-house life does have a way of interfering with that. As a senior in-house lawyer, you will be getting calls on the weekend and things like that. But I think the culture now over the last few years has got a lot better. People are much more respectful of that. And it's okay to push back on that. But let's face it, if there's a fire at the factory or there's a product complaint somewhere, or you have to deal with it.
Yes.
And so, if you're thinking of if you think that the move from private to in-house means you have a cushy life, you're wrong.
That's good, because that ties in very nicely to my next question, Bucket. What is one piece of advice you would give to a law student or a junior or mid-career lawyer thinking of making a move from practice to the world of in-house? I know you mentioned do secondments, but let's say like I'm a, 15-year PQE partner in a law firm. It's unlikely that the client would want me to be seconded to their officers.
True. You're going to be going for, you're going to be slotting in at a reasonably senior level. You're either going to be a regional counsel or even a GP or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think my answer would be very different depending on whether I'm talking to a law student,
that's true. That's true.
They're very different.
True. Very different. Okay, let's talk about the more senior one, because you were a senior lawyer making that move.
So I think for the senior people is the key thing is you're going to be drawing primarily on your skills, your partner skills, either on the client management and people relations side of your practice rather than your subject matter expertise. Your subject matter expertise is just assumed, and you will be called upon to exercise it, especially if you're in a public company and you're coming in because you've got, securities and exchange type expertise. That's obviously a technical area. But for most in-house counsel, the skills that you're really drawing upon is knowing your client, knowing your client's business, and managing the people, and they're managing the issues through managing people. And so, there are different types of partners, right?
Yeah.
Some partners are finders who love going out and they find clients, but they don't necessarily look after them once they've got them, right? They often will bring in another partner who's more of the sort of minder grinder type, right? I think if you're a minder grinder, you'll be fine. If you're just out there looking for the next big thing, you're not gonna fit so well with the and unless you're going into an industry that's heavily litigation prone, litigation's not necessarily ideal background, because it's all about being very close with your client.
True.
And utilizing those skills that you had as a partner. Think of all those times when you helped translate that junior lawyer's 20-page memo into a one paragraph on the fly in a way that gets the client to say, yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're not.
Yes. Okay.
That's what you're going to be drawing on. So if you like that aspect, in-house is for you.
Great. And maybe for the law students and the junior lawyers, correct me if I'm wrong, Buchan, but because the grass is not always greener, right? So if they are currently in practice, or they are going to start their first career in practice, my advice, which I think is similar to yours, is that don't just make a snap decision to go in-house just because the going gets rough in a law firm, because the going can be even rougher.
Way rougher.
In-house, right? Way rougher. It's not a plan B. It's not a cushion life.
Yeah. The pressure that you feel in-house is significantly greater than what you have in private practice.
Yes.
Private practice can be a lot more intense. You will have, you're coming up for the IPO, you're working 23 hours a day.
Yep.
Running on empty for about 3 or 4 weeks up to the build-up or whatever, and then you release. It's a slow, constant pressure that is very heavy when you're in-house, if you let it become. Going back to the earlier points about balance, family, and all the rest. So I agree. Don't make a snap decision. Please reach out to people, and you're a great resource. I know that you help set people up with conversations with people. And if you are a new lawyer or a junior lawyer and you're thinking about the in-house, and you absolutely try and seek out the views of people at different levels, and I guess one of the hard things to understand as a very new junior lawyer is the fact that there are different stratas of your legal career where the practice, whether it's in private or in-house, is very different. It's very different being a lawyer on an in-house team to being the lawyer or the leader on the in-house team. It's like someone told me once, everyone thinks they can do their boss's job until they get their boss's job. And that's very true. And so be aware that the career path, there are different strata, and it changes quite significantly as you move up those strata. And it goes further and further away from the technical side and dealing with documents and legal issues and interpreting things, into people management, issue management, many more commercial aspects, understanding business, and I come back to my key theme, which is like it's all around people management.
Yes.
And relationship management.
Relationship management.
It gets much more heavily on that later on. Now, so in order to be good at that latter part, you need to have the experience early on. So my key advice, and as someone who's hired quite a few in-house lawyers, I'm never going to hire someone with only a few years PQE. I'm sorry, my budget doesn't allow me to train you. I'm expecting you to hit the ground running. I'm expecting you to have demonstrated to me that you have had situations where you've really had to exercise judgment. You've done so and it's worked out well. There's only one way to have that, and that's do the hard yards. And so law firms are fantastic. You get fantastic grounding and all the things that you will draw upon. So I guess the only thing I can think of that's directly similar for a new lawyer would be, think of the difference between being at law school where you read loads of cases and things like that, and then working in a law firm where you probably don't do half the things you used to do in law school. It's the same when you go from private practice to in-house. You need to have done all of that and you need to understand all of that, but you're not going to be using it, but you will be drawing upon it constantly. Again, one of the interesting things I found is that because I had done a history and politics degree before my law degree, my legal degree slanted slightly more towards public law issues. And people said, oh, you're never going to use those in commercial practice, blah, 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 blah. Sure enough, when you're an in-house counsel for a heavily regulated multinational company, guess what you spend a lot of time doing? It's like managing government relations issues, working with the government relations people on getting regulations amended or changed or whatever, to better fit your industry, or taking government officials to task because they've acted outside of their authority, etc. So you're going to draw on a lot of things. So you need that experience. Get the time in a law firm first. Get the time, go and work in your uncle or aunt's business or something. Do some commercial work. Do anything to get experience, and then come to the in-house world as a rounded, experienced person who knows some stuff about the world, not just about the more technical legal aspects.
Yes. Hey, fantastic, Buchan. I agree with you 100%, because that grounding, that foundation in private practice, even though I'm not an in-house lawyer, I sometimes wish I tried it out, because I was in practice for 4 years. And then I felt like I called it quits too early. I should have tried another law firm. Yeah. That's one of my regrets. But anyway, if you could have a chance to do...
Lucky for us and all your clients that you
But so Buchan, if you could have a chance to do a do-over, anyway, you're very kind, Buchan. It might give me blush. But anyway, over the last 20 over years, is there anything you do differently in your career?
I would have tried to get more non-legal experience. The great thing about my career is I love being a lawyer and I was passionate about it, and I was absolutely happy being a lawyer all my career. Especially for the latter part of my in-house career, I wish I had some experience of maybe running my own small business or doing something a little bit more commercial. So John, who we both know well, he had the great experience of being an in-house lawyer, but getting the opportunity to actually run a small business within the company he was working for, to run it as a GM, essentially.
Yes.
In a new expanding area. And I mean, he's very commercially minded anyway, but that's fantastic experience. He was then able to communicate to the business really as a business person. I was a lawyer. I was a commercially savvy lawyer, but I was not a commercial person. And so I wish if I could do it all over again, I would take time out, not at the start, but maybe about a third of the way through my career to maybe go and do something
non-law,
non-specifically law.
Understand.
Yep.
Okay. And now, Buchan, because you're back in New Zealand, you are, like I said, the envy of many people. I'm sure your family and friends. Like, because now you're outside, in a way, of Asia. You've also, you're not currently in the legal market per se. How do you see the legal market evolving in the future? Do you see any threats, to the legal industry, or are there any opportunities you foresee for lawyers?
Well, every threat is an opportunity.
Yeah, true.
So to sound trite, but yes, and actually, it's an interesting question because I will confess that was part of the thinking of the question you asked me earlier about deciding to leave.
Yes.
I think one of the most important things of any professional, and in particular lawyers, is to be constantly assessing how you are doing with regards to the industry, the changes that are taking place. And when I was having those contemplative times, I came to the realization, 5 or 10 years ago, I can say I was an outstanding in-house lawyer. I have no hesitation in saying that. I was. I know I was.
I have no doubt.
But now I'm definitely behind. I'm behind the ball. I'm behind the game here. And that's partly because I've started not being as passionate and as interested because I'm interested in other things. But and so I haven't bothered to follow up and learn a whole lot of new things. But I think the big threats and opportunities are in the whole, there's the commoditization of law, and it's mixed up with the legal tech and digital, and in particular AI, right? And so the short answer is you can't stop those things happening.
Yeah.
So as lawyers, you need to adapt and change. And I can think of a few people I know. John is one who are really well placed, and you can see them completely adapting. And it would be nice, if I was in my 30s as opposed to in my 50s, I would be much more fascinated and wanting to go ahead and do that. The fear I have for the legal profession is that it does become commoditized, and that the human element, it sounds corny and altruistic and all this, but there is a huge human element to any legal issue, whether it's commercial, criminal, otherwise. It comes down to certain people wanting to achieve certain things in a right way or a bad way, and there's a human element to that. And like I read the reports on all the AI and things, and they are better able to predict the outcome of cases than, the top lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yes, but like all AI is like, is it factoring in just because something's correct? Does it mean that that's the way we should go? Being correct is one thing. Being good is sometimes different. I'm waxing philosophical, but those are the natures of the fears that I have. I've always thought part of the role of the lawyer is to be a conscience.
Yeah.
And sometimes being a conscience is not about what you. It's definitely not about what you can get away with. It's not about whether it's like whether or not you can or can't do something. It's should you.
That's true.
Yes, you can do that. Yes, you can say that on the press statement if you want. Are you sure? Do you really want to say that? Is that who we are? Is that who you are? And I think lawyers are especially in-house lawyers, if you're sitting at the table as you should be, you're in a unique position to be able to raise that. You're probably the one person in the room who has the job security to some extent and the expectation of the people that are in the room with you to be able to propose that counter view.
Yeah.
To be able to propose that slightly altruistic, slightly amorphous, should we? Really? Is that the right thing to do? Those kinds of questions, that moral basis is a role. And I think if that gets lost, then the legal profession becomes mercenary and commoditized, and I think that's negative.
Yeah.
The opportunity there is for far more digitally savvy and native lawyers that are coming through now to realize that there's thousands of years of legal practice that has happened before you. There are some really good things about those old concepts of honor and morality and things like that you can tap into. Can you bring them along in the ride towards AI and a digitized workspace? Can you continue that human element? If you can, fantastic. Then you're going to have all the promise of efficiency and predictability together with doing good.
Yes. And actually, Buchan, I agree that the human element is very important, and I don't think it can ever be commoditized. That's my personal view. I mean, to be honest, when LinkedIn first came about, I thought that my job is gone. I better go back to work in a law firm, you know? Yeah. But it's life is, in fact, I think it's even more crucial because a lot of things cannot be filtered out by a computer. That's maybe that day will come, who knows? But thanks so much, Buchan. So now that we've heard from Buchan the lawyer, before we wrap up the podcast, let's get personal and ask some very quick, fun questions. So Buchan, what's your favorite drink? I know you're not a wine drinker anymore, right?
Not a big drinker now. I used to drink a bit more. That's one of the dangerous things about moving to Singapore is that big expat drinking culture. Although I'm learning New Zealand has a big drinking culture. I'm not a big drinker, but I do, if you ask me favorite drink, a very good vodka martini before dinner is excellent.
Nice. Okay. Comfort food? Is it your wife's cooking?
Well, it's Thai, of course.
Thai.
And Thai is such a large cuisine. There's so many varieties. But I've always liked Thai staples like pad krapana, or that's the beef with Thai basil, or a tom kha gai, the coconut based. I enjoy a good tom yum, but having had so many tom yums in my life, and my wife's quite a foodie, so where you become very particular, and so if it's not quite perfect, and then it's not good enough. Whereas I think things like Thais have a saying that if you don't know what to order for lunch, just order krapao, right? So the beef with basil or pork or chicken, whatever it is.
Nice.
Tom kha gai, they're quintessentially Thai. Yes. But they're very everyday dishes. So real comfort food. Love it.
Nice. And any favorite movie or TV show?
Well, like many men of my generation, Godfather Part 1 and 2 has to be the ultimate movie. And I think for in-house lawyers, Tom Hagen's character in The Godfather is a magnificent study of the kind of relationship. Obviously, hopefully you're not working for a criminal organization, but that relationship of counselor, because we're called general counsel, right?
And if you can sum up in one sentence, Buchan, what's your motto in life?
Follow your heart, but use your head to get there.
Wow. Thank you, Buchan. We could continue on and on, I'm sure, because we love. I love speaking with you. I love hearing, and in fact, there's so much wisdom in whatever that you shared. And thanks for being so generous. Thanks for being a guest on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure, and all the best with the podcast.
Yes.
I really support what you're doing. I think it's great. And I'm humbled by the fact you thought me worthy of it. I'm sure you've got many other people who could speak to.
No. Yours, yeah, truly. So thank you so much, Buchan. So I'm just going to wrap up. So if you'd like to get in contact with Buchan, then please check out the notes on this episode where a link to his LinkedIn profile will be found and details of anyone mentioned on the show. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then be generous and share it with as many people as you can. Rate it, review it, and follow me on LinkedIn. And we'll find out more for what's in store for us after the bar.